Home. The word may evoke visions of grandma's back porch or mama's kitchen table. Home. It may rouse smells of fresh buttermilk biscuits or apple pie on the cooling rack. Home. Maybe the word brings back sounds of deep belly laughs and bedtime stories. Or it stirs glad memories of wooden swing sets and warm quilted beds. Home. A few years ago, I was working at the Boys and Girls Home of North Carolina in Lake Waccamaw. It's a group home for children and teenagers who either have no family or were taken away from abusive ones. Many of the kids there faced terrible tragedies and traumas, the kinds of traumas that disrupted their own cognitive and emotional responses to stress. For example, one of the kids that I got to know there was named Dustin. Now, Dustin had his own swag. He was the kind of kid that drew pictures on his shoes with Sharpies, walked around in the summer with fur hats on, and was just always ragging on people. One time I was riding down the highway with Dustin in the passenger seat, and he rolled down the window and started singing, "Baby, you're a fart and you make me want to roll my windows down." He was a goofy kid, likable, hilarious, creative, and trying to find his place in the world. I remember one of the days that I was there, a small fight broke out in the cottage. One of those arguments that was easily fixed. But Dustin flipped out, started screaming and cursing and flipping over tables, and then he just made a mad dash out of the cottage and slammed the door behind him. I found him a few minutes later, sitting by himself on a dusty sidewalk underneath a sweltering sun. With red eyes and a quivering voice, Dustin looked up at me as I approached, and he said, "Mr. Keith, I have no home." I looked at him, not knowing what to say, and I thought about his file. Father and mother incarcerated, separated from 3 siblings, 5th foster home placement. Yet nowhere in his file was this haunting reality: I have no home. And yet here he was at this place called the Boys and Girls Home of North Carolina. So what kept this place from being a home? What was missing? I have no home. Those words continue to lodge in my heart. And like the young teenager who sobbed that reality, the protagonists in today's scripture also find themselves without a home. Naomi has lost her husband. She has lost her sons. And when we see her in Ruth 1, Naomi stands on a dusty road, preparing to leave Moab, this foreign land that has been so cruel to her. And she plans to head back to Bethlehem, the land of her childhood. Standing on a dusty road between 2 places, Naomi is homeless. With all of its famine, Bethlehem was no home to her before, and so she had to leave for Moab. But with all of its death, Moab was no home for her anymore. She is homeless and grieving. But she hears that God has brought food back to Bethlehem, and so she thinks, maybe I'll journey back there. Bethlehem, she thinks. Literally, Beit Lechem, house of bread. What a cruel irony in the presence of all she has suffered in life. Perhaps this Bethlehem, this house of bread, will have crumbs left for her begging stomach, for surely that is all that awaits her there. As a childless widow, what other choice does she have but to beg? She cries out, "Surely the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Naomi's grief smarts with divine betrayal. She laments, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Her agony is heightened by a theological crisis. She not only loses her husbands, her sons, her home, but she believes God is the one who has done this to her. The God who is supposed to provide. The God who is supposed to never leave or forsake her. The God who was supposed to have a plan for her life, for her good. The God who was so faithful to her ancestors, that God has turned against her. And so, believing this, Naomi cannot let her daughters-in-law stay with her. And so, holding their hands on that dusty road, she musters another ounce of strength, and in an act of love, she releases them. The three women weep aloud together, shedding soft kisses and wet tears on each other's faces. And the daughters-in-law assure her, "No, mother, we will return with you to your people." Naomi sits with these women on that dusty road between Moab and Bethlehem. And who knows how long they sat there, maybe hours, maybe days, weeping, hugging, remembering. Naomi feels the warmth of her daughters-in-law with her and hears their warm assurances. But Naomi knows better. She has seen what this world has to offer. Naomi knows the tense ideologies that Bethlehem has towards outsiders. The kind of ideology that wants to build a wall around the city and keep foreigners out. And more than that, Naomi knows the life of despair and uncertainty that awaits her there. She pushes her grief aside for the moment because she loves these women too much to let them stay. And so, gathering her last resolve, in another act of love, she releases them again, saying, "It has been far more bitter for me than for you. No, my daughters, turn back." So after much urging, Orpah wipes her red, puffy eyes. She sets out down the road back to Moab, back to what she hopes is still a home for her. The scripture does not condemn Orpah for her choice. In fact, the scripture defends Orpah's great love for her mother-in-law. Orpah is called to a different journey and one that we will never know. And so, weeping and kissing the woman who has been her mother, Orpah turns back. But Ruth clings to Naomi. Naomi tries again. "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return back with her." And so Ruth finds herself standing on a dusty road between two places, face to face with a grieving woman and with a choice. She can turn back to security, to her own people, or she can walk forward to uncertainty, to Naomi. Whatever journey our own separate lives have been, all of our roads have led us here today, together. And as humans, we are all Naomi at some point in our lives. We've each experienced our own losses and tragedies. But as people of faith, we are always Ruth, standing on dusty roads between two lands, face to face with a grieving woman. As people of faith, we hold our own grief and our own painful losses. But we must see the Naomi who is standing in front of us on that road between Moab and Bethlehem. The Naomi who has lost all hope and succumbed to despair. The Naomi who has pushed away the people in her life just as she believes God has done to her. Naomi stands here before us. Who is she in our world? Naomi is the inmate forgotten in the jail cell. Naomi is the elder abandoned in the assisted living center. Naomi is the child isolated in the foster care system or the student overlooked in the classroom. Naomi is the church member staggering in her own atheism, and she stands here before us. Naomi is the man sobbing at the funeral home. Naomi is the woman aching in the hospital bed. Naomi is the sick woman turned away from the hospital bed. And she is the man hungry on the corner downtown, and she stands here before us. Naomi is every bullied child, every lonely widow, every unemployed mother and criminalized teenager. She is the hopeless, the abused, the addicted, and the self-loathing. and she stands here before us. In the midst of terrible suffering and tragedy in this world, we people of faith, we stand as Ruth on a dusty road between two lands, face to face with Naomi. Now we can turn back to what we know, or we can walk forward towards her. And so Ruth, weighed down by her own grief, face to face with Naomi in a choice, Ruth chooses to walk forward. Hear her steadfast promise.
Do not press me to leave you, or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people, they are my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you.
Faced with the choice, Ruth chooses to walk forward to Naomi. Her words here are the only poetry in the book so far which spotlights their significance. Calling on God, Ruth's words invoke the ancient Near Eastern oath of covenant, of such strong relational bond between two people that indeed, as Ruth states, not even death can rend this vow. After hearing this, Naomi says no more. There's no going back now. Covenant relationship. Holding her own suffering, Ruth chooses to walk forward and also hold Naomi's. Ruth casts her lot in with this other woman, promising that their relationship will be a source of stability and security when nothing else will. They walk into this covenant together as they leave the dusty road for Bethlehem. But when they get there, the town barely recognizes the grief-stricken Naomi. Naomi cries out again, "Call me no longer Naomi, delight. Call me Mara, bitter, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me." Naomi's pain is still indescribable, and it is a pain rife with divine rejection. But listen to how her language about God has changed. If you look back in the text, on the dusty road between Moab and Bethlehem, when she believes she has lost it all, Naomi refers to God as Yahweh, literally YHWH, that vowelless, unpronounceable, mysterious stand-in name for God that can only be written, not spoken. But here, after Ruth has bound herself to Naomi, Naomi calls God Shaddai, Almighty. Perhaps Shaddai speaks to a God whose might is beginning to overshadow Naomi's grief. The irony of Shaddai might be Naomi's budding realization that perhaps God has not abandoned her. Where is God in all this tragedy? Right here, on the road, in the moment when Ruth binds herself to Naomi. Now, the ending of the story is beautiful, and I wish we had time for it. Lexi did a great job summing it up for us. The short version is that at the end of the story, Ruth finds a husband who honors her agency and her womanhood. And Naomi knows that she is loved by God as she bounces a giggling grandchild in her lap. Truly, God has not abandoned us. And sometimes the only way we know that to be true is through the relationships that we have with another person. Another person who binds her life with ours. Another person who mediates for us a space of security and stability. I wonder, isn't that what home is all about? A space of security and stability? A shared space of covenant relationship? Maybe then, while Ruth and Naomi find themselves on the road without a place to lay their heads, they mediate a type of home for each other through their commitment. A relational space where God's peace, stability, and security are experienced. home. I recently went on a riding retreat up on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I met a retired rider there who was 88 years old, and he told me that he was recently grieving the loss of his husband from Parkinson's. I asked him about his experience with grief, and he described the loss of his husband with one poignant word. He said to me, "You know, Keith, without him, I feel homesick." Home. It's not about places, but people. And too many in this world have no partner, no family, no friend to help make a place a home. They are the Naomis of this world, standing on dusty roads and believing that God has abandoned them. People of faith, College Park, we stand as Ruth. We hold our own grief, but we are also called by God to bind ourselves to others in this world, casting our lot in with theirs, and in so doing, be their home. As Ruth demonstrates, being home for another person is as basic as crying together. And it is as committed as tying your fate in with the despairing and uncertain fate of another person. You all have taught me that being home is also as simple as sitting with someone in the surgical waiting room, or helping someone pack and transport boxes to a new house, or baking some chocolate cherry cake for a young, poor grad student. Thanks, Miss Starcy. I still keep in touch with Dustin, that young teenager from the group home. And I think in my mind he will forever be that young boy sitting on the sidewalk. In response to that child grieving his own homelessness, in response to every sacred soul grieving their homelessness on this earth, I look to us, the people and church of God. Sister Elaine Roulette was a nun who was famous for her work on the streets of New York. And she was once asked in an interview, "How do you work with the poor?" She answered, "You don't. You share your life with the poor." Covenant relationship. It is casting your lot in with another person before trying to change theirs. It is about binding our lives to another. It is about being home for each other. We all stand in the dusty road together, face to face with our own losses and with Naomi. We can turn back, or we can move forward and practice being home for other people. May it be so.